I say that digital actually driving the economy today. And part of the example that I want to share in Malaysia landscape per se is that the digital economy of Malaysia actually contributes about 70.8% of GDP today, based on the report of 2015. So this is a significant achievement that we never experienced 20 years ago, right? And one of the things that probably I can share more is that in this industry of digital adoptions in the next 10 years, if we can see much more progressions in the area of transforming the traditional industry like sector like financial services, business services, oil and gas, manufacturing, healthcare, and education again, there is a significant opportunity that we can enjoy as a country in order to contribute to the GDP based on digital transformations.
See, Mr. Loh talked about challenges in terms of how the business is changing from traditional way to digital way, like Uber and other things. How is banking changing here? Can you throw some light into it?
I think the biggest change in banking is the need to have more openness. So we talked about fintech, voice of the customer. So there's a need to sort of, be more open in terms of opening up our systems, our technology, right up to customers and third parties, right? That's obviously a massive cultural change because generally we are very concerned about opening up too much, especially when the regulators are watching you very closely. So I think that is really the fundamental shift. We're all told to be, whether you're a front office staff in the branch or whether you're a system administrator, whatever you do, have the customer in mind. So I think that's the biggest sort of paradigm shift there is in banking.
So that means basically you are taking your systems all the way to the customer. Some of them, right? So that throws open. How does this change, or what kind of threats do you see when you do something like this?
The threats are roughly going to be the same, if we're being honest. So you're talking about Ubers, you're talking about the likes of application banking, mobile banking, these types of things, where the apps are going to be out. I think to the point of exposing the systems, 100% agree. So the word API is being thrown around a lot these days. It's not a new term, it's quite an old term. But now people are talking about exposing that out. So exposing that out into the ecosystems, that's going to become a challenge. How do we prevent people from being able to come in? Now, the border protection, it's always going to have to be there. So you're rightly saying, Jay, the IPS, IDS, firewalls, all this stuff will always, it's not going to go away.
Right.
So you're talking about moving into the digital space. The challenge isn't going to disappear. The threats are going to remain the same. They're just going to come at you from different angles. So if you're looking at IoT, etc., which is where everyone is also moving, I'm sure Standard Chartered is also looking at the same things. It's just new ways of coming in. So we need to work that out.
I think the biggest challenge, and I think this is across industry, is, I think a term cyber plague was used earlier by Jay. I'll introduce a new term called cyber hysteria, right? There's element of, implementation hysteria, purchasing hysteria, merger and acquisition hysteria, alliance hysteria. Now, it's all very good. I think the industry needs to come together, but I think there's something we shouldn't forget. I mean, with all this hysteria, sometimes our judgment may be clouded, right? We end up cutting budgets for things we don't need and purchase them, or things like that. So I think what's really needed is pragmatism, and sometimes it's a challenge, right? With the sort of evolution of threats, I mean, every day there's something new we see. Every day we get loads of incidents. Everybody wants to have a go at us, right? So how can we remain pragmatic? So as much as we want to focus our investment on critical asset, we need to revisit our risk assessments and say, actually, what is critical? What if compromise can also gain a further foothold into the organization? So it's a challenge because there's a pot of money and it's not very big at times. I think the other challenges includes the ever-growing regulatory scrutiny. I just share with you the recent SWIFT incident, Bangladesh Bank. 9 regulators are now requesting for reviews to be done by the bank. I mean, day to day, I have 140 audits a year nearly. Regulator, internal, external. It's almost fatigue, right? So that's another challenge, is how do I get my job done? How do I actually protect the bank or the organization? At the same time, I have auditors and regulators all over me.
when we see this, does this require, I mean, with this kind of big threats that are coming up to you, with the threats that are increasing, does it require big security?
So I think I would sort of term it as maybe probably security analytics, because I think normally when people think big data in the security terms, they think about the SIEM solution, right? And I think the SIEM has definitely used, but I think it was originally designed to handle more technical information. Although now there's a lot of vendors which position the existing SIEM products to do analytics and vice versa. But we have to remember that, security analytics is not just about big data, but it's also about diverse data, right? As I mentioned, traditionally SIEMs can only take in, log information, compliance assessments from your vulnerability scans. But we're looking at more, right? I mean, especially around insider threats, we want to ingest things like, ITAM data, HR data, physical access log data, right? For things like that, traditional SIEMs probably can't cater for that, right? So it's definitely something we're looking at, but obviously a challenge, because with the different data we require to sort of address the scenarios we're looking at, there are different challenges as well.
What do you think about, does this kind of big threats, or that reason, increase in these threats require some sort of big data security in the organizations?
All right, so based on my experience of in this industry, right, 15 years ago or 16 years ago, when I was promoting security solutions to client, in those days that in the tender review, probably one of the questions they'll be asking is that how many viruses you can detect, right? Fast forward 15 years later, those questions are not valid anymore, right? And very simple reason is that those that you can achieve 15 years ago probably happens in 1 or 2 days and in the volume that we see today. So that is about external attack, right? But I think that what a colleague here, Murali, actually shared very valuable information is that we are no longer looking just external attack, we are looking at internal compromise, right? And this actually complicated the situation much more critical. So I think is that when we look at this context of big data, aside from the external threat, internal threat, there should be a correlations of threat intelligence, not based on what the environment actually knows. Whatever that you can ingest in a SIEM probably is what you know in your environment, but they actually have to have another set of reference to the external, which we call threat intelligence, right? And with that reference or threat intelligence, they actually give you a very close or very, I would say, a closer information is what actually you are subjected to today, right? And with that context also, I think in the industry today, we are lack of this threat intelligence platform. Most of this is probably coming from a vendor's perspective of it, a vendor supplying the threat intelligence. And through the community itself as an industry in Malaysia, I think we need to have a closer conversations. How do we build a threat intelligence, what called that community threat intelligence for the local usage purposes, right? And that is one side of it. And another side of it is that industry should be looking into another combinations of technology, what you call sandboxings, right? Threats that you see today are not, I would say that, are not known for all the organization. Probably that threat is new to you today and only to you, right? Sandboxing technology today is some of the area that we should be further explore. I think that's some of the area that this industry is still growing in terms of sandboxing technologies. So those are two aspects I'm sharing, the threat, what we call that, threat intelligent collaborative platform, and the sandboxing technology. I think this will further enhance the threat intelligence capability.
So essentially you're saying that there must be sort of a combination of internal view, that what we know, and an external view, what we don't know, should be merged in a way to build the next security.
Yeah. So that is a model today. I think is that what we call that collaborative intelligence should be the model that we all should be exploring. I think that's some of you may be exploring today. But I think it's that industry, not only the bigger guys have that kind of capability. I think in any generic organization that if you're connected, you have a connected user environment that you expose your user to the internet and which you already had, right? And I think that's where you need to understand what is What are the areas that you expose your users to? And how do we know that we can control the environment before it getting worse, right? Things that we should assume that all the organization could be compromised, right? But the challenges will be that if you're in that situation, how do you react to it? I think there is what we call, there's a model that we should be exploring further.
Does big data security, how does the big data security take advantage of threat feeds or threat intelligence from external sources? And it's an extension from his quote.
How does it take it from external feeds? Once again, coming back to the industry that I currently work in, external feeds is once again the access points. So the access points are multiple these days, right? So if you're talking from once again, from my perspective, mobile banking, etc., that one I think is well known. But people forget things like the smart TVs, they're forgetting photocopiers, they're forgetting all this type of stuff, right? Which is where people are coming in. But I 100% agree. What we need to start doing is we need to start coming up with algorithms against our big data. So I agree, and I think it was a very valid point about looking at external access. It's looking at the input points, it's looking at the logging of the servers, and trying to correlate this together. I always tell my team, I'm not interested in the guy that's knocking at the door anymore, because I think that protection is pretty much there. We've just got to make sure we've got the doors covered, because I think there's constantly new doors coming in. What we're interested in is I want to catch the guy that's in the roof, and he's been there for a week or two, I don't know. So I think these are the ones that we're trying to look at, right? So we want to correlate, I agree with you, all this respective data, and it's a big challenge to work out the algorithms to be able to identify it, but a server hasn't contacted a certain server before. And I 100% with the IVR. For instance, why is an IVR talking to ATM push server? By rights, if we had done it properly, someone would have been able to pick up that that server should not be communicating to that server. They may not have been able to prevent it, but you could have responded. You could have turned around and quickly taken down the ATMs. And I think if you go back to the whole, and I know the one you're talking about with SWIFT, that was also the same thing. SWIFT was Foxit injection for one of the banks in Vietnam. So once again, they should have been able to, once again, it's easier said than done, right? But if you can identify that there's certain things that are happening that shouldn't be happening, there's a certain network traffic that's happening that shouldn't, a server spoken to a server, there's a login that shouldn't, to a server that's never been seen before, there's a door that's been accessed. This is good, I'm going to take that back. There's a door that's been accessed by someone that hasn't been accessed before. These are all triggers. And so, as I'm saying, so the big data to me is not so how much do I protect myself from big data, but how do I use big data to protect myself? I think once to Jay's point about the vaccination, it's heading in that direction. So historically, we've been, as I say, washing our hands and doing this type of thing, right? But now we've got the capabilities, we're building capabilities, once again, through vendors, also through internal skill, to be able to try and identify something early and try and not necessarily vaccinate it, but eliminate it or quarantine it. Automation is going to play a big part in this as well. So, for instance, if there's a server, once again, this is very high level examples, but say there's a server talking to a server, if we can build in the automation to block that traffic immediately. So we don't need to go back to someone to evaluate it. So in other words, we should stop it first, then go and investigate. Whereas I think the way that we think at the moment is the other way around. We see it, we get an alert, because I'm sure everyone's got their SOCs, NOCs built. Someone goes in and investigates, someone looks at it, a couple of hours pass. By that point in time, it's too late. The data's either gone, or my biggest fear at the moment is the ransomware's in. And for the ransomware, to me, is one that is up and coming, and I think that's going to be a major, major disruptor for everybody. And they're putting the code out now. So, zero disrespect, but 15-year-old kids can go and get it, and they can play. And they do it for fun. And the trouble is, half the time, they probably don't know how to unlock it.
Maybe I'll just add on the threat intelligence. Okay. I think traditionally as well, we've looked at threat intelligence as technical threat intelligence, right? So indicators of compromise and all that. But I think, as a company, as security professionals, we need to understand what's going on in the business as well, right? For example, if the business is making a particular acquisition, or there's a merger in a particular country, or from a banking perspective, we're actually financing a deal, these can also be intelligence for you, because, for example, if from a banking perspective you're financing a deal which has environmental consequences and Greenpeace is all over it, guess what? Anonymous is probably going to latch onto it and have a go at you, right? So I think stepping out of the technical threat realm, understanding what the business is doing, understanding things like sentiments as well, social media monitoring. That's probably something done by corporate affairs. But a lot of this, I think, depends on trust as well between, various functions within the company, where you have partnerships outside the company. A lot of it's down to trust, whether people want to share that information with you or not.
That's a good point. You kind of jumped, rather it looks like you stole my question. The question is essentially, what are the typical use cases? And you already outlined a use case with more detail. Thank you.